Take your favorite chocolate chip cookie dough and omit the chips and then divide it into 4. Yes, I know it looks like 3 right now, but I did divide it into 4. This first flavor is cinnamon bun, so I rolled it in some sugar and some cinnamon. And then I'm going to make classic chocolate chip for the next one. And of course, it's not going to be incorporated into the center of the cookie, but you get enough chocolate chips doing it this way. Moving along to the next flavor, pretty similar to the classic chocolate chip, it's going to be an M&M chip with some sprinkles on top to make it really nice and fun. And for the final flavor, I did have to mix in the ingredients just a little bit more here, but I did it very sparingly because we don't want to make a tough cookie, and that's coffee crisp. I added a couple tablespoons of cocoa powder as well as a generous heaping spoonful of espresso powder, then some coffee crisp bites and a cocoa powdered coffee bean. Then some icing sugar mixed with milk for the cinnamon bun flavor. I often use this method when I want to make a bunch of different types of cookies, but I don't want a ton of each cookie. It's also so easy to switch up the flavor combinations. So let me know down in the comments below, what type of cookie would you be making? This story comes from a long time ago when I used to work at a bakery, and my boss at the time asked me to make this cake that was a custom order. And what I was supposed to do was I was supposed to cover it in fondant and then just use an edible marker to recreate this Maxine card. If you don't know what a Maxine card is, it's basically an older woman that has really funny quotes. Usually it's for birthdays and things like that. Well, in this particular card, she was wearing a bathing suit, but it was kind of cut off so I couldn't see the whole body. And I asked my boss whether I was supposed to make the body look young or if I was supposed to make the body all saggy like the quote said. And my boss said that she thought the funny part of it was that the body looked really young while the quote was talking about saggy bathing suits. So I did as my boss said, and I made the body look really young. And then when the customer came in, I expected her to be thrilled with the cake because I actually nailed the drawing freehanded. But she actually broke down in tears and said that it wasn't saggy enough. So as she sat on the porch and cried for 30 minutes, I waited for my boss. A lot of you guys felt like the unhappy customer story I told you was a little bit inconclusive. So let's just call this part 2. So where we left off was there was a customer that was unhappy with her cake because the bikini on the cake was not saggy looking enough. So she was sitting on the front steps crying. I was inside still working on other cakes, waiting for my boss to come and rectify the situation because rightfully so, I could not make final say decisions on things like this. As I was working on other custom cakes for that day, the customer comes in and all of a sudden she jumps behind the counter and starts pulling out all the fondant that I'm working with on another cake and puts it on her cake, trying to show me that the bikini needs to be made saggier. Well, luckily before I could say anything, my boss shows up and she intercepts and tells the customer to go back behind the counter. She actually ended up refunding the customer entirely for the cake, and she also gave her free cupcakes as well. At this point, I could not be more grateful that I was working for somebody else, as I really did not want to have to make any tough decisions like that. I was asked to make a dessert in a very particular shade. Now, prior to accepting the order, I did preface it by saying that I probably wouldn't be able to get that exact same shade. Admittedly, when I made it, it wasn't the same shade at all. It was still the same color, but definitely not the right shade. But I decided to send a picture to the customer just to see if maybe they would accept it. And I did this a couple of days in advance to their event. It was the type of dessert that does need to be made in advance, so it really wasn't a big deal that I was sending her a picture of it beforehand. And to my surprise, she actually said they looked perfect and that they were beautiful, so I breathed a huge sigh of relief. Fast forward to the day before the event, and I'm getting everything ready to go and get packaged up. I end up dropping the dessert and breaking it, so I have to remake it, and the shade actually ends up a lot closer than what it was before. I send a picture to her again and explain what happened, but she was not happy, like for part 2. She started saying that the dessert wasn't anywhere near close to what she wanted in the first place, and that she should have known from the very first picture that this wasn't going to work out how she wanted, which is a little bit weird because she said that she loved the first picture, so I really didn't understand where this was coming from. She started getting very irate on the phone with me, demanding discounts, so I decided to just relinquish and give her a discount. This happened a while ago when my baking space was a lot smaller, so everything took me a lot longer to do. I was so upset that I had made so many mistakes by sending photos and getting approval, as well as actually dropping the dessert in the first place, so I had to remake it twice, and now I ended up giving this huge discount as well. To top it off, she ended up being really rude to my husband when he dropped off her entire order. Now, this one singular incident didn't make me quit altogether. It just made me pivot on what I actually wanted to do. And I much rather make fun tutorials than have to deal with incidences like that ever again. This was my very first time making vegan macarons, and I, of course, just couldn't keep it at a regular circle shape. I wanted to make carrots. Now, this definitely didn't go perfectly smoothly all the way through. I did get one tray of good macarons, and that's because I finally fixed my oven temperature. It was a little bit too high, so if you ever get those macarons that are exploding out the sides, it's because your oven temperature is too high, or it might not be even as well. So I actually had to bake these at about 270 degrees Fahrenheit, which is quite low for all of the other macarons that I normally make. I never want to throw in the towel when it comes to a fail. I always try to see it through. I've told you guys that in another video, but this one definitely worked out a little bit better in terms of me being able to hide the mistakes. You still see the macaron exploding out the sides on some of these, but it's a little bit less obvious because of that airbrushing, and most people just look at this as they're eating a cute little cookie. Enjoy! What do you do with all of the desserts that you make in your videos? You can't possibly be eating them all. That is definitely correct. I don't ever really eat any of my baked goods except for macarons and cream puffs. And occasionally if I try a new recipe, then I'll also eat that. But for the most part, I don't eat the cakes, cookies, or cupcakes that I make in my videos. What I used to do at the beginning of my channel was I wouldn't really advertise that I was taking orders, but friends and family would come to me and pay me just for the ingredients, and I would have the creative freedom, sort of. I still had to make things within the theme of what they were looking for, so I would just kind of make it work for my channel. And since I was uploading every single day, it really didn't matter to me what the theme was. Now that I upload a lot more infrequently, I do have particular ideas in mind for videos, so for those things, I just give them away to friends and family. For these cupcakes shown here, I had a lot of leftover material, so I made them for my daughter's teachers. Decorating cakes for people is super fun, and it's exactly why I chose it as that little something extra that I wanted to do on the side. However, I feel like when people walked into the bakery and said this, it was usually followed up with, I just wish I could sit around all day and decorate cakes and get paid for it. And there's innately a little problem with that. I feel like it's discounting all of the work that actually goes into cake decorating. Now, my issue here is not really with cake decorating and discounting that in general. I think it's everybody's job in the world. I have to admit that in my teenage years, I really had this perception that certain jobs were more important than others. And I really just don't believe that to be true now, because each and every job, no matter how little it seems, does play such a pertinent role in society. And I also feel like there's hard work behind every job that we just might not be privy to. And I know that some of my cake and cookie decorator friends might feel like their job isn't that important, but the truth is we bring so much joy to people, and that's important. My sister threw me a baby shower when I was 37 weeks and 4 days pregnant. She requested that I make all of my own baby shower treats, as she knew I would be pleased with them. This was back when I was constantly overbooking myself, and even this late in my pregnancy, I didn't think anything of it. I wanted to be that mom who could do it all and not let pregnancy hold me back. Yeah, that was silly. Anyway, I spent the morning in my shower finishing up all of the treats, but I also had cakes due for the next day as well. The baby shower was lovely, and afterward, I got right to work and started crumb coating and decorating my next day's cakes. As this was my first pregnancy, there was no telltale signs for me that I was going into labor. So although I had very swollen feet and felt very heavy, I just continued on and thought I needed a break. I decided to lay down for a bit as I was getting really tired, and as soon as my head hit the pillow, my water broke. Some doctors suggest taking a walk to spur on labor. Apparently, all I needed to do was decorate a cake. After a quick Google search, I'm now finally understanding why there's so much confusion. I typed in French macaroons, which isn't really a thing, and discovered that the rough concept of macarons did originate from Italy. The French changed the coconut to almond flour and sandwiched 2 cookies with ganache. Both do use egg whites, so essentially in nature they're the same, but turn out completely differently. More than likely, though, the confusion came about because macaroons were definitely more popularized in my lifetime earlier than macarons were. My mother, who is fluent in French, calls them macarons. No matter the accent or region, though, these are absolutely not macaroons. This is a bit of a follow-up from me telling you guys that I was banned from baking growing up in my household. And to this day, at my parents' house, I am not really allowed to use the kitchen. So as we all know, the key to making sure that my secret baking society was never discovered by my mother, I needed to make sure that everything was clean. Well, one time I had a really big surplus of dirty dishes and I needed to get them done fast. So my friends said, why don't you just use the dishwasher? Which I just thought was absolutely ridiculous because in Chinese households, we never use the dishwasher. So I said to my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time and my best friend, so I can just leave things washing in the dishwasher and we can go and do whatever it is that we needed to do at the time. And they said, yeah, it's going to be totally fine. Well, about 5 minutes later, it starts exploding soap. We ended up washing everything by hand. Did you know where I hid the baked goods?
No. I hope it wasn't in your room under your pillow.
No, it was in Candace's closet.
Okay, that's not good. I wish you hadn't told me that.
454 grams of butter, $6.71, 12 eggs, $4.24, 1 kilogram of powdered sugar, $3.35, 5 kilograms of all-purpose flour, $6.55, 450 grams of baking powder, $4.87, 400 grams of baking soda, $1.65, 1 liter of buttermilk, $3.57, 473 milliliters of vegetable oil, $3.12, 46 milliliters of pure vanilla extract, $8.57. After taxes, this comes to a grand total of $42.63 Canadian, or about $36 in US. The butter here is what's really limiting the size of the cake. Conversely, you could just buy an 8-inch cake from the grocery store for about $25. I want to preface this by saying that when I ran my home baking business, I offered a lot of different products which can be less cost effective than when you stick with 1 or 2 solid specialties. As we all know, buying in bulk and being able to make things in bulk will always be more profitable. That was part of my downfall when it came to selling sugar cookies. My sugar cookie sales, though, were actually quite high, but when I look at the profit margins based on time, they were nowhere near the same amount as my cupcake or cake profit margins. If we look at stock orders, baking cupcakes is slightly less labor intensive as you do not need to roll out dough and cut out shapes. One cupcake can sell for around $3.75 Canadian, and it takes approximately 10 seconds to actually pipe it and add sprinkles or toppings. Likewise, a sugar cookie with a base ice and minimal designs takes me at least 1 minute to decorate and costs around the same amount. When creating custom orders, cupcakes could easily skyrocket to $6 or $7, but in my experience, it was a lot harder to sell when it came to custom sugar cookies that would get up to that range. All in all, continuing to sell custom sugar cookies was a labor of love. I still continue to decorate cookies for nothing, all just because I love it. Just for this amount, $37 Canadian, and this isn't even all the stuff that we need. Look at us so full of hope and energy, but you'll see towards the end of this short that quickly changes. Now, when I make cake or cookie projects, I know pretty much how long it's going to take me. I had no idea that making this plated dessert would take us nearly 13 hours. Now, to be fair, there were a lot of components going into this, and some of the ingredients that we needed for this, we had to swap out for other ingredients, and we really weren't sure if it was going to work. This was specifically evident in the type of chocolate that we purchased. We tried to get the best quality, but we weren't sure if the percentages would work out exactly with the mousse that we wanted to make. We've literally been at this for hours. Like,
how many hours? What time is it?
Almost 12 hours.
That's insane.
Let this be a lesson, though, that even if you have a lot of experience, you can still drastically miscalculate. I was still happy with it, though. I was a competitive figure skater for about 14 years, and that was incredibly nerve-wracking whenever I had to compete. I was also a classical pianist, and that was even more nerve-wracking, having to make sure that I didn't forget any piece of music during piano festivals or piano exams. But I gotta say, the most nerve-wracking thing in my adult life is having to hand over a cake to a customer and watch their reaction.
So let me tell you guys what it's like to be the husband of a chronic baker with a problem. So sometimes there's just sugar everywhere, and I always have to fill up the big tub of whatever, flour, sugar, etc. And sometimes you're entertaining guests and your buddy comes over and sits on your bar stool and stands up with a big yellow stain on his new khaki pants because there just happened to be very concentrated food dye forgotten and missed on the stool. Other than that, it's pretty good. Ashleigh's sick for now, so I'll be doing the remainder of all of the shorts.
So a display cake is usually made out of inedible supports like styrofoam tiers, and then it's covered with edible things like fondant. I usually opt for fondant because it's not a material that will deteriorate that much over time. The most you're going to see is probably fading, and if it does sustain damage, it might get cracked here and there. So you can always replace it very easily. I get asked the question all the time, why bother making a display cake if you can't even eat it? What's the point? There are lots of reasons why you might make a display cake. For a bakery, it's a great way to show off your body of work without having something on display that's going to expire. For new decorators, it's a great way to practice without wasting too much material that goes into a cake. And for someone like me, I just love the look of a big cake, and I often don't have that many guests to actually eat a real cake, so it does save on ingredients, and I can also reuse the styrofoam tiers to create something else. But this definitely isn't a new concept. My mom said that when she got married 40 years ago, they also had fake cakes at their wedding and a secret drawer which had the real cake in it. Now, this is actually my own question because truthfully, I get a lot of positive comments saying how much people love that I share my custom cake and cookie pricing as a benchmark. But one thing I've had difficulty understanding is why people are secretive when it comes to custom work and custom artwork. And when it comes to custom cake and cookie orders, it's so much more fluid, so I really don't understand what the secrecy is with that either, because we all have to have some sort of benchmark to work with, especially to avoid undercutting. I often hear of experienced entrepreneurs getting a little bit upset with newer entrepreneurs for doing so, but the truth of the matter is how would they actually know what pricing should be if people keep it under wraps? And I do see this a lot, both online and in real life. Now, perhaps I have a different mentality altogether because my full-time job outside of YouTube and baking is very, very public about how much we all make. In my honest opinion, all of this secrecy really just seems to be helping those that don't want to pay you what you're worth. I hear this all the time, both in my real life and online, where people feel very concerned when other people make the same product as them. And more specifically, since I'm a baker, I often hear the phrase, I started the idea of the cake jar or DIY cookie kits or making content that looks like X, Y, Z. And the truth of the matter is that I think that art is so fluid, it really is hard to tell who created the first whatever. But I don't necessarily want to focus on the idea of originality because I think that's such a large, broad topic that has many avenues. Now, what I really want to talk about is that none of us can actually steal, quote unquote, any of each other's success. Even if we take an idea or are inspired by something, that doesn't necessarily mean we can dull the shine of others. This is specifically evident in the creator world on YouTube. One thing I've learned over the years about business and about YouTubing in general is that if you just focus on what you're doing and don't look at others as a measure of how you're doing, you're going to do just fine. If you put a group of cake and cookie decorators in a room and ask them to decorate, you'll quickly realize that not everyone is following the same steps. There's inevitably going to be some overlap, but even something as basic as crumb coating a cake can be completely different. This is because all amazing cake and cookie decorators make their own rules. I've always heard superlatives from either end of the spectrum. You should always to you should never use a rolling pin to cover a cake with fondant. My newer motto when it comes to edible artistry is just do whatever works for you. There really are no rules when it comes to cake and cookie decorating. There may be techniques that work better for individuals, but as long as you deliver on a quality product, who cares how you got there? I have really vivid memories from my childhood. I would say anywhere from 2.5 years old onward, I can remember very clearly. Yet for the life of me, I can't seem to remember when somebody tells me something from one day to the next. And don't even get me started how I can't remember somebody's name when they were just introduced to me. But anyway, there's this one Christmas I remember really, really clearly. I was 3 years old and I was gifted this really awesome McDonald's hamburger making set. Now, my parents spoiled my sister and I so much around Christmas time, so they probably thought that they were doing something nice for me by getting me exactly what I asked for. But me being a 3-year-old child didn't understand that the kit didn't come with all of the ingredients, and my parents didn't have any of the ingredients on hand. And back then, stores weren't open on Christmas. I remember crying on and off for a few hours, and I still feel bad for my parents to this day. And they're pretty strict, so I'm surprised that that continued on for so long. Whenever I buy any kids' toys now, though, I always make sure everything's included. I really love that bakeries now are offering tons of different options for everybody's palates and dietary needs. Vegan options, gluten-free options, I'm seeing them more and more in your everyday bakery and even at grocery stores as well for baked items. But this is something that I really tried to stay away from when I was running my home baking business. At first, I did try to be super accommodating. When you're first starting out, you try out a whole bunch of different things hoping that something will stick. But considering this isn't the way that I normally eat myself, I felt like I couldn't really make gluten-free options and vegan options because I wasn't quite sure, A, what really went into every single one of those things, and B, I couldn't make sure that all of my equipment was free from gluten, for example. So I really didn't do a whole lot of dietary options for my home baking business. However, I think that those who do offer it are going to do really, really well. Now, the first batch, not so great. Second batch, better. The road to 100,000 subscribers looks different for everybody, and for me, it was a 2-year journey. I started in the year 2020. I'm sure you could figure out why that inspired me to start a YouTube channel. I wasn't really making a whole lot of baked goods back then because I was taking a break. I was on a mat leave with my son, so I decided I really want to get back into that, doing that a lot more than I was. It wasn't that I wasn't doing it at all, I just wasn't really making orders anymore, so there was no reason for me to get up and make a cake. And this was a great reason to do that. So I uploaded every single day for almost a year and a half straight. And then eventually I just kind of went down to about 2 uploads a week. Sometimes I would upload multiple shorts a week, and I'm still doing that to this day. I got monetized, I believe, within the first 6 months, and then I became creator on the rise on YouTube, which was really cool. And in the last few months, my channel really blew up and I reached 100,000 subscribers. So thank you guys so much. If you've watched my videos before, you know that for party favors, I usually give sugar cookies. And I've been so busy and tired the week leading up to my daughter's birthday party, so I was super relieved when she begged me to make meringue cookies instead for the party favors. I still remember the very first time that I ever had meringue cookies. It was at my friend's house, and her mom was a really great chef, and I did not know what they were. But when that friend and I planned our Sweet 16 together, I said, I really want those things that were like puffy and light. And she said meringue cookies, and I said yes. And at the time, they were really not popular at all. All of our friends at the party did not know what they were either. But I do remember that they were light pink, and they were just as airy and crunchy as I remembered. Overall, though, I remember my Sweet 16 party being a little bit of a disaster, but that is definitely a story for another time. These meringues were Descendants themed. I remember when I first started teaching, I was so excited to take my class on field trips. Pumpkin Patch, the dairy farm, I wanted to take them everywhere. But eventually I realized field trip days are actually the most exhausting days. This is very similar to the way that I felt about birthday parties. I always wanted to throw my daughter the most elaborate birthday parties I possibly could. And I did for the first couple years. But after a while, I realized I don't like all that mess in my house, and it's really hard to take care of 12 kids at once. So I've definitely switched over to always either renting out a space or doing it at Chuck E. Cheese or something like that, because I love it when the party is just super scheduled and it's done in 2 hours. The kids have fun, I'm not too burnt out, and all I have to do is make sure that I bring those pretty desserts that my daughter requests. Not a sponsored video, but a shout out to the Cookie Countess, where we got most of the DIY kit stuff from. So love your stuff. The quality held up so well at this YouTube Canada Brandcast event. When we were all discussing what is it that we can do that's interactive with our guests that's going to be fairly quick but also related to desserts, the first thing that popped into my head were these DIY painting kits, because we really needed to make sure that people could kind of go in and out with their decorations, and it's really difficult to do that with a piping bag, especially when you're working with people that maybe haven't worked with a piping bag before. These paint palettes are water activated, and yeah, if you can believe it, that is Tesher, writer of Jalebi Baby, which also has Jason Derulo on that track, painting these cookies. He was so fantastic and wonderful, and everything about this experience was blowing my mind the whole time. It's a great activity, and I know we're a bunch of adults, but this is a great one for the kids too. Do you ever have those friends that make such an impact in your life, but then they're only your friend for a short period of time? I had one of those friends, and we were super close all throughout my early 20s and late teens. She knew that I loved baking, so she would invite me over to her house all the time to bake. And it was so much fun going out, getting the ingredients, and trying out something. We made a lot of gross things together because, trial and error. But one of the grossest things that we ever made were these meringues. And by accident, I had dropped a ton of salt into them. So they really didn't turn out. And her mom was actually a pretty good cook herself. So she did help us fix some of the issues. Like when we tried to make homemade marshmallows and they were sweating out like crazy. So her mom taught me the trick of putting a little bit of icing sugar and cornstarch all over it to prevent sticking. She also bought me my first set of piping tips and taught me how to use a piping bag. And wherever she is now, I hope she's living her best life. Have you ever heard somebody say, "You're eating that for breakfast"? I've always thought this was kind of strange, but I'm sure at some point I've also thought this too in my life. But the more that I think about it, is it really that wrong for you to eat a non-breakfast food during breakfast? I feel like eating breakfast any time of day has become more widely accepted in North America, but I also think people would find it strange if I said I had pasta for breakfast. And then that got me thinking to my next point, why can't you have dessert for breakfast? Because I really feel like things like waffles and pancakes and muffins are essentially the same products. It's just kind of in different ratios than that of a cupcake or than that of macarons, for example. So though I personally wouldn't advocate to eat dessert for breakfast because I'm more of a savory person, I really feel like, is it that wrong to eat macarons for breakfast, especially if it looks like a donut? Most of the time that I'm making cakes that are over 2 tiers, chances are they're actually going to be made up of fake tiers. So it's styrofoam that's covered in fondant or buttercream, and then there will be maybe a real tier on top. Now, there's always been this debate, even within the cake community itself, should you charge the same amount as you would for styrofoam versus real cake? Now, some of you might think that's a no-brainer. Of course, you're going to charge more for the real cake. Now, in reality, the cost of ingredients is very similar to that of the styrofoam pieces that are cut, especially if it's a custom cut, like a hexagon. It also depends if your bakery makes things in mass or if you're just a home baker making something completely on your own from scratch. This particular cake that I'm making here was 4 tiers of fake cake and 1 real tier for my best friend's wedding. This cake was part of their wedding gift, so I didn't charge anything. And it was about 6 hours of active work. How much would you charge or pay for this cake? In my early 20s, I feel like my thinking was very close-minded, and I had this huge thing where I didn't want to give Halloween candy to anybody that I thought was too old. But now in my 30s, I think that's just so ridiculous because my sister and I went trick-or-treating for a very, very long time. My childhood was very strict and regimented, and the idea that I was able to be out on a school night or I was able to be out very late on a weekend night was just so freeing for me. I felt so independent being able to get all of that candy while trick-or-treating, and it was something that I could deem as all mine. This is why I think my sister and I trick-or-treated for way too long. Now, I want to say that my sister was actually deemed as a legal adult when she finally stopped trick-or-treating. We derived so much joy from it, and this is exactly why I am willing to give out candy to anybody and everybody that wants to trick-or-treat. Happy Halloween! A little while ago, I made a short about how I'm Canadian and I'm not American, but a lot of people assume that I'm from the United States of America. And I honestly thought that that little video would just be left at that and everyone would go on their merry way. But surprisingly, not just 1 or 2 people said this, but quite a few comments and people on Instagram also said that Canadians are Americans, and I've never ever heard of that. I agree that we are North Americans, and I'm willing to believe that perhaps in different parts of the world, they refer to Canadians as Americans, but I go back to Lee Greenwood's song, God Bless the USA, and in the chorus it says, and I'm proud to be an American, and I don't really think that he's saying that he's proud to be a Canadian. So people of the internet, can you just clear this up for me? Are Canadians being referred to as Americans in other parts of the world? If you celebrate Christmas, then I'm sure you have your own Christmas traditions with your family. One of our family's traditions is eating sticky rice at dinner. For some reason, I always thought that that was super normal growing up, but then I came to realize after I started dating my husband that no, not everybody has sticky rice at dinner. I don't know why I didn't clue in with that before. My husband's side of the family always made the kids sing for their presents, so they would have to put on some sort of winter presentation before they were actually allowed to open their gifts. And one thing that we did in our immediate family, which isn't necessarily a tradition, but it kind of just went this way, is that we would have to wait until about 2:00 p.m. every Christmas before we were allowed to open any gifts. And even though there was only 4 of us, for some reason, present opening always seemed to take hours. Again, I never thought that this was unusual, but my mom really likes to sleep in, like past noon every day. Now we let our kids open up their presents straight away in the morning. What time do you guys usually open your Christmas presents? I never considered myself a singer, more of an instrumentalist, and I still feel that way to this day. And I remember for the first couple years in preschool, I was always cast as the shepherd and not the angel or Mary who I really, really wanted to be. To be honest, I don't really know how the preschool teachers decided who they would cast us as, but I was always a shepherd. So was my sister. By the time I got to kindergarten and grade 1, though, I was in a different school and I was cast as a main soloist. To be honest, I really can't remember what the musical was about, but I remember I was wearing safari clothing. And then fast forward a few years later, and I do believe that I actually got to play some sort of angelic character that sang Silent Night in a Christmas musical that we put on. And then a year later, I was cast as the narrator in Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. But I remember getting off the stage and asking my mom how I did, and she said that I wasn't nearly as good as any of the other singers. So that's actually the day that I stopped singing publicly. But now I'm a music teacher, and I love empowering young singers to perform. It's that time of year again. We are approaching Halloween, and I must say that the weather here in Vancouver is so much warmer than it has ever been in October. When I was a kid, we basically had to wear almost a snowsuit underneath our costumes, so it didn't matter what you were dressed up as. You always just looked like this kind of giant sausage coming out of your costume. That's why I was a pumpkin for about 5 years in a row. This year might be the year where my daughter actually just gets to wear her costume as is and doesn't have to follow the tradition of stuffing a bunch of jackets and other clothing underneath. Let me know down in the comments, how do you celebrate Halloween, if you celebrate Halloween at all, and let me know where you're from. I always went trick-or-treating as a kid. I pretty much did nothing else. And I remember this one particular year where somebody was giving out hot chocolate. I'm sure that they were just being nice, but I was convinced that they were trying to poison me. I was really hesitant to start a YouTube channel because I just wasn't sure what I would actually put on that channel. I always knew that it would be related to baking if I ever did start a channel, but I thought, how many different types of cookies can I make? And honestly, who's gonna watch me crumb coat a cake 56 times? It turns out, though, that even though I simplify all of these things in my mind, there's actually a lot of different tips and tricks that go into cookie and cake decorating. And the best piece of advice I've ever gotten is, Ashleigh, they may have seen some of these techniques before, but they've never seen them explained by you. Since 2009, the longest stretch of time that I've ever gone without making a cake or any edible art of any sort was 3 months, and the reason is not a great one. If you guys follow my channel at all, then you've probably heard the story about how I had my baby shower and I was decorating a cake and then my water broke, and that's how I went into labor. But this next part I haven't told you guys before. So I ended up being in labor for 32 hours and it ended in me having to get an emergency surgery. But not just one emergency surgery, but 2 emergency surgeries within a span of 3 weeks. And I was stuck in the hospital for that whole time. When I got back home finally and I was semi-healed, I started developing a hole in my stomach. So I wasn't really able to stand up straight and I really couldn't lift anything either. I could barely lift my baby at the time. It took me 3 solid months to be able to stand up straight again, and the first thing that I wanted to do was decorate a cake. And it should come as no surprise that my caking bestie was right there by my side every step of the way. Lemon meringue pie is one of my sister's favorite desserts that I make. So anytime there's a family gathering or a barbecue, she always requests that I make this. And at first when she requested it, I found it really, really odd. Now, the reason is because my sister is afraid of fruit. Now, let me preface this by saying I'm not really sure if the word afraid is the correct verb, but she said this all the way through adolescence, and we really just accepted that she did not like to eat fruit. She especially does not like citrus, and the thought of having to peel an orange really freaks her out. And I fully accept this, but one time we got into a fight when we were teens. Now, this is definitely not very nice on my part, and being the younger sister, I always felt like I had to do even more to one-up my sister and win the fight. So what I ended up doing was I peeled an orange, I ate it, and then I hid the peels everywhere in her daily life. Pulp on her toothbrush and peels on the door handle. She did scream, but for those of you that are wondering, how is this her favorite then? There's no seeds and it's lost its juice. All right, guys, I'm gonna say it, and I really debated about making this video, but I do like to address comments that I get over and over again on this channel. I like to keep things fairly neutral. However, this one comment has been coming up over and over again, and I gotta say, it always seems to come up in many different ways. I'm constantly, quote unquote, being accused of being American. Now, in my opinion, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being American, but I get a lot of comments accusing me that I do something because I'm American, or better yet, I get corrected on a lot of things. For example, this past weekend was Thanksgiving in Canada, and I was told that I was completely wrong because Thanksgiving is weeks and weeks away. Now, I'm sure there's lots of reasons why this comes about, but I think one of the main reasons is because I speak English on this channel, but I want to point out that one of the official languages of Canada is English, and America technically doesn't have one. Here's the thing, guys. As a content creator, I really try to make sure that my titles are as truthful as possible on my videos. However, the YouTube algorithm does favor certain words, but the closest I've ever gotten to saying that I was a professional was when I say things like how to decorate a cake that looks professional at home. I feel a lot more comfortable calling myself a professional in the things that I actually obtain a degree in. However, it does bring up the interesting point of quote-unquote professional cake decorators. Several bakery owners that I've spoken to don't actually obtain a red seal in cake decorating or the pastry arts. However, I'd be really hard-pressed to say that they aren't professional cake decorators. So let me know down in the comments below, guys, what actually constitutes a professional cake decorator? When my channel hit around 50,000 subscribers, I really noticed there was an upswing in how many comments I got about glove wearing. Many of which were asking me, why don't you wear gloves? It's not sanitary not to wear gloves. And I actually do wear gloves now in my videos, but the reason isn't because of all of these comments. In my opinion, washing your hands with more frequency actually keeps your workspace and whatever you're working with a lot cleaner. Plus, if you're wearing gloves and then you accidentally touch another surface that wasn't cleaned or sanitized properly, you've got to throw away that pair of gloves and then put on a new one. Which I have to be honest, I've seen in a lot of establishments where they do wear gloves frequently, they touch other things, and then they touch the food product. So in all honesty, I really feel like just frequent hand washing is the way to go. But the reason I personally wear gloves now in a lot of my videos is because I'm often working with edible paints and airbrush, and I used to get my hands dyed all of the time. So it really saves my skin. Working with Russian tulip tips can be a little bit tricky. The challenge usually comes with the consistency of frosting or icing that is being used. This is one of my favorite icing transfer methods when I have thick royal icing left over because it's a lot quicker and smaller than piping a full flour. Now, you can just pipe directly onto your cookie, cake, or whatever other dessert that you're wanting to decorate, but I'll often do this when I need to pull the theme of the dessert table together on site rather than completely decorate it prior to transport. These went into the oven at 175 degrees Fahrenheit for approximately 5 to 10 minutes and they were ready to go. These dried royal icing flowers are also super easy to pop onto any dessert that may have gotten damaged or looks imperfect on the dessert table. Follow for more baking tips. Why don't you share recipes? This is one comment that I continually get on my channel. I'm fine with sharing my personal recipes on my channel, but the truth is when I set out to create content on this platform, I never thought I would be sharing that many recipes. In my intro, I say, hi, it's Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials, as well as give a lot of baking business tips. And nowhere did I ever really talk about recipes and baking from scratch. This is mainly because I don't have that many recipes of my own. The main cake recipes that I use are based upon recipes I found years ago in books or online, and I've tweaked them ever so slightly, or some of them I've left completely as is. To be honest, I've scoured the internet and looked at several videos where many recipes are really similar with only slight changes. Baking is all about correct ratios and food science, and there are really only so many ways to spin it without turning it into something completely different. But I get a lot of negative comments about this, so I'm going to be posting a part 2 to give you more of my thoughts. So I used to think that because I had an interest in baking, that the ultimate goal was always to open up my own bakery. And then that would mean that I finally reached the pinnacle of success when it came to the baking world. But there are so many other ways to continue growing as a baker and make baking a business without actually opening your own storefront. One of the ways that you can do that is, sure, you could be an at-home baker, and I know that a lot of people like this. However, a lot of places don't actually allow you to sell baked goods directly from your home. So this might not be an option for some of you. The next way is if you're passionate about the teaching aspect, you could definitely run your own classes. And this is a great option because you could either be an online teacher exclusively, or you could also hold in-person classes. The next thing, of course, is YouTube. You could run a YouTube channel and you don't always have to do tutorials. You could make satisfying cake and cookie decorating videos, or you could have special guests on there. The limit is endless. I'm going to show you guys what it's like to make a huge delivery while you're also part of the event. So in my family, we generally do celebrations pretty big. So my hairdresser arrived a couple hours before I was due to go. I quickly did my daughter's hair, and then we loaded up the car full of all of the desserts. And yes, I did have to hurriedly drop off one of those towers to my sister's house in an emergency because it was tipping over. Finally, I arrived and it did all arrive intact, which I was very grateful for. And if you're wondering, yes, there was buttercream on my sister's arm when she delivered that macaron tower. Then even after everything was delivered, of course, me being the cake maker really had to inform everybody about how to cut that top little cake. Comment down below if you're the cake maker of your friends and family and you get asked how to cut the cake, or you simply get asked to cut the cake even after you've done all of that work. And on the way back, I get to sit in the front with mostly dress everywhere. Happy 40th anniversary to my mom and dad. If you've seen the show Wall of Bakers, then yes, your eyes do not deceive you. Ravina is a judge on Wall of Bakers, and she's the owner and operator of Just Cakes. And right now it's a little bit tricky to tell during this time lapse, but Alia and I, Cake Legend here on YouTube, are competing to see who can make the best plated dessert, reinventing an old classic. And prior to starting this challenge, I was incredibly nervous because, as you guys know, plated desserts really are not my forte. I'm much more into the cake and cookie decorating part, but I do like the pastry arts, and so I really was trying my very best here. We gave ourselves a 2-hour time limit to come up with this fully plated dessert, and I can't say that I love working under pressure necessarily, but I do love the fact that because I don't take custom orders anymore, I have a lot more time to play around and really learn things that I've never learned before. Full video of this entire competition coming soon so you can see who wins. This is my 5-year-old daughter, and she used to make a lot of content on my channel when I first put it up in 2020. But slowly over the years, she decided, you know what, making content is not for me. And I often get asked the question, do you want your daughter to bake just like you do? And the answer is actually no. And it's not that baking isn't a viable career, and it's not that I don't love doing it myself, but I want her to be genuinely happy and to follow her own dreams. Now, I know that all sounds incredibly cliche because, to be fair, it kind of is. However, I was told very much the opposite my whole life. Not live your dreams, but do what is going to make you money and what is going to just keep you on the straight and narrow road. That way of thinking definitely led me to a level of even and steady success. However, if I had taken every word of that to heart, I don't know if I would have been able to create the following that I have here on YouTube, which I'm super grateful for. By the way, Aria says her dream is to be an accountant. So I've been a little bit behind on my uploading, which I apologize for, but I haven't been making tutorials because of 2 reasons. One reason is because I'm still editing down some footage and I'm having issues with space, you know, the typical creator stuff. And then the other thing is that I cannot ever make any more cakes or cookies or other baked goods until my kitchens are fully clean. And I have been leaving some of these things for way too long. And when I do end up just pushing through, things like that cookie cutter pile will just build and build and build until I literally don't know what order my cookie cutters were supposed to be in the first place. I'm a very clean as I go person, especially when I'm baking and cake decorating, but I realize now that the reason why I sometimes get a little bit disorganized, like you saw earlier, is because I don't adapt quickly enough. It's easy to put things away when you actually have a place for them, and sometimes I find that a little bit tricky with all of my things. But I've reorganized and I'm ready to get baking. Growing up in a Chinese household, we would always eat family style, meaning we would have our own bowl of rice, but there would be dishes in the center that we would eat off of. Now, I lived there until I was 24 years old, and I would say from 12 years old onwards, we kind of ate the same thing. And by kind of, I mean we ate the exact same thing. Every Monday, we would have the exact same meal every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So needless to say, once I moved out, I was completely sick of rice. So I didn't actually have rice for a solid 2 years once I moved out. Now I've reincorporated rice back into my diet as well as my family's diet. And I've still held on to that tradition of family style eating. So we will often have several types of dishes and then everyone can just choose what they want, which is exactly what inspired me to make this shortcake charcuterie board. It not only keeps everything nice and fresh and prevents that cake from getting soggy, but everybody gets exactly what they want on their individual shortcake. I went on a quest to find the best chocolate chip cookie recipe a few years ago. I think it was before I had children, but one thing that kept replaying in my mind over and over as I was trying to find the right recipe was that one episode in Friends where Phoebe says that she knows this great recipe from her grandmother, and it actually turns out to be a Nestle Toll House recipe. Sorry if that was a spoiler for anyone, but seriously, have you been living under a rock if you haven't watched Friends? Or you might just not like it. Anyway, In that episode, Monica gets really upset because she feels like she'll never be able to make the best chocolate chip cookies for her kids, and that really struck a chord with me. I've always wanted to make the best chocolate chip cookies and be the mom that made the best chocolate chip cookies and all of the yummy cakes for her kids. After a lot of trial and error, I found that the secret to the best chocolate chip cookie for me is the addition of browned butter. So the other day I talked about how my sister is afraid of fruit and oranges more specifically. And surprisingly, so many of you guys also don't like fruit either. And a lot of you felt bad for my sister because I hid the orange peels everywhere. Again, like I said, not my finest moment. However, I also have a severe dislike for condiments. More specifically, I really can't stand ketchup. The thought of having to distribute it or eat it or touch it really grosses me out. And my sister used to eat ketchup with eggs all the time. I'm pretty sure she still does it. Now, she didn't do this in retaliation to the whole orange peel thing that I did to her, but she did do this to me. We were having this kind of taste test game show that we were doing. We did a lot of things like that growing up, and she put ketchup and sprinkles on a spoon, and I ate it, and it was honestly the worst thing in my entire life that I've ever eaten. I'm a pretty adventurous eater, but ketchup is the one thing that I will never ever eat again. You know that song Wake Me Up When September Ends by Green Day? That's what I feel like right now, and I'm sure a lot of teachers could agree with me. September is a crazy month, but in the baking world, I found that September was actually quite the opposite. The bulk of wedding season is over, so it's a great time to restart, organize, and make sure that you are ready to go for the next orders. And this is also a great time to start planning out all of your holiday treats and goodies. I sometimes like to follow what I call the Costco schedule. So you know how Costco always seems to have Christmas decor and Halloween decor out way earlier than you could ever imagine? Well, sometimes just planting that seed is a good idea. So it really is good to get your pre-sales out fairly early. Now, maybe not too early, but early enough so that people will start thinking about Halloween and Christmas or whatever other holiday traditions that you want to sell pre-mades for. So if you're a baker, happy baking. If you're a teacher, good luck. So I've always thought that my parents were pretty prim and proper. They're fairly conservative, except for this one time when my mom said that her favorite song was Chingy's Right Third. If you've never heard that song, then you can go look it up and listen to it, and you'll see why it's so shocking that my mother, the conservative one, liked that song. But I always wanted to be that person who stayed on the up and up, especially as a parent. I wanted to be the type who knew all the songs on the radio. I love music, so I thought that would be pretty easy. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job. And it was about a year ago when I discovered I was starting to lose touch with that because some of my students were using these words that I had no idea what they were saying. But then one of my friends said, "That is so chuggy," and I seriously thought that she was speaking a different language, but then all of my other friends seemed to know what she was talking about. And that was the minute that I felt old. Let me know down in the comments, do you know what that means? So I have to admit, it's really fun to bring a 3-tiered cake into work. It looks impressive, it looks fun, and it kind of just brightens everyone's day knowing that they're going to be getting cake. But the thing with bringing in a tiered cake is, first of all, it makes the drive there a little bit dicier than it needs to be. And also, I find that people don't actually want to cut the cake because they think it's too pretty to cut. People are also going in and out of the staff room all the time, so I want to make this very easy on them. I remove all of the outer decor that generally just doesn't get eaten, and then I go ahead and cut each slice and individually wrap them to make this very easy. And by lunchtime, my tray already looked like that. Now, I wasn't the only one to bring in treats to work today. Somebody brought these pineapple cakes in for the Mid-Autumn Festival. And I haven't eaten one of these since I was a child, but it has this great chewy pineapple center and a nice crumbly outside. By the time I went to go collect my tray, it was completely empty. So the other day, I asked you guys how much you would charge for this cake or how much would you pay for this cake, and I really unexpectedly got a lot of comments regarding the fact that most of this cake was fake and only the top tier was real. And many of you seemed rather upset that I would even bother making a fake cake, and especially for my best friends. Well, here's the thing, they actually requested it be primarily fake. Now, in this particular situation, it's not like they were trying to save money cost-wise because this was a gift from me, so I wasn't charging them anything. And like I mentioned before, fake and real cakes are generally around the same price with a minor cost difference, mainly because when you pay for a cake like this, you're really paying for the decor. When clients hear this, many will just opt to have the whole cake real, but some will still opt for the fake cake because the venue will charge you per slice for whatever they have to cut. And for many, it really is just about the look and having that traditional piece at their wedding. There's this video going around where somebody talks about how difficult it is to be a social media influencer. Now, as somebody who works a regular quote-unquote 9-to-5 job as well as works in social media, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding from both perspectives. My particular profession required me to get 2 degrees, and I also have a specialty in music, and I've been studying and playing the piano for about 3 decades. It's consistent, there's a consistent paycheck, but there is a cap on how much you can make, and obviously the work hours are very strict. In my particular field of content creation, I haven't spent nearly as long working on my craft as I have with music, probably about a decade. And I spent even less time working on skills like editing or filming. But I have the privilege of being able to upload when I want to, stop when I want to, and there's also no financial cap. There is no limit to how much you can make as a social media influencer. That being said, both jobs present their challenges. I put a lot of hours into content creation without knowing if I would ever see a dime. I'm really sick today, so I went to the doctor, got my prescription, and was going to go pick up my medicine from the pharmacy when I put my mask on. I really thought nothing of it. Some people wear masks here still, some people don't. I figured because I was still coughing quite a bit that I should probably put my mask on. And in all my years of living in practically the same neighborhood, I've never ever experienced racism outwardly. But these people started harassing me, and they started implying things like that I didn't actually speak English as my first language, and it was probably hard enough to understand me as it was. I always wondered what would I actually do in a hypothetical situation like this. They were speaking about me, but not directly to me. But it turns out what I do is I ignore them because I knew that honestly talking to them wouldn't have achieved anything. My problem with the situation wasn't that they were against mask wearing. That's neither here nor there. My problem with the situation is that they had to bring race into it. And honestly, what type of right or privilege do they think they have that they can dictate what the public wears? If you're a cookie decorator, I highly suggest that you go and check out the Cookie Countess. They just sent me a whole box of goodies and I'm opening them up for the first time. I'm so excited to try out these magic stencil screens, and all of these stencils are so adorable. I thought I had a pretty extensive stencil collection, but I don't have any of these, and I've used this brand before and the quality is fantastic. However, this was probably the most exciting thing to unbox because if you guys have been watching my videos, my airbrush has literally had it. When I saw this, my legitimate reaction was, oh, so you don't just have to cover your entire counter with edible airbrush? Then they also sent me all of their edible pens and edible airbrush colors, which I'm so excited to try out. Be sure to follow if you want to see what I end up making. Quick and easy baking tips that I wish I knew when I first started baking. Invest in different sized ice cream scoops. It's really going to save you a lot of time, and make sure you get those ones that are quick release. Different types of salts can dramatically change the way that your baked goods will taste. Less likely it'll change the taste when you mix it in with ingredients, but when you're doing a topping, I highly recommend things like flaked sea salt or fleur de sel. One of the best tips for getting the perfect madeleine is making sure that you butter your pans and then freeze those buttered pans so that the butter solidifies. It makes sure that it comes out really nicely and doesn't overbake that butter. Also, chilling that batter for at least 1 hour will make sure that you get that perfect madeleine hump. Any recipe that's like a blondie or a snickerdoodle or anything that has that white batter is going to taste infinitely better if you brown your butter first, let it cool and solidify, and use it as normal. And finally, use a T-ball that clamps so that you can pick up the perfect amount of icing sugar and then go ahead and distribute it on whatever desserts need a fine dusting. If you're a beginner baker, then something like Swiss meringue buttercream can seem really complicated, but it's actually fairly simple. And you don't really need a thermometer, though of course it's great if you have one. Basically, all you're doing is you're taking your sugar and your egg whites and you're putting it over a double boiler system just to get all of that sugar dissolved. And once that's dissolved and you get a little bit of air in those egg whites and sugar, then you're going to whip it. And it takes a really long time to actually get this to a stiff enough peak until you can add the butter in. And it's really important that you add in room temperature butter, or else you're not going to get the correct texture for your buttercream. Swiss meringue buttercream is the choice for many because it's a little bit less sweet and it's got a really nice smooth flavor. Right now I'm doing a series all about different types of buttercream, so be sure to check out my channel for more future full-length videos. Running my own baking business really helped me learn a lot about myself. When I was in the planning stages, I just thought about how cool it would be if everyone was eating cake that I made or cookies that I designed. I never really thought about the intricacies of the business. I mean, I did think, okay, I'm going to have to be very scheduled. I'm going to have to plan things. I'm going to need to go on ingredient runs. But I didn't think about myself and my personality. I never anticipated how meticulous I would be about everything and how much I would actually second guess myself. So my classic sugar cookie recipe includes 6 cups of flour, and sometimes I would think that I lost count or that I put in the wrong ingredients. So in the beginning, I would waste a lot of time thinking that I put in the wrong ratio of things or that there was a hair somewhere. Hair really freaked me out for a long time. And I don't think any of those worries ever actually fully went away, but I did learn over time how to deal with things better. Right now, you're witnessing one of my least favorite jobs when it comes to making fondant cakes, and that is dyeing the fondant. And I haven't done this in a while, so I was getting a really good arm workout from this. Now, ordinarily, when I was making a lot of cakes, I would just have a lot of different colors on hand. If I had the primary colors, then I was able to mix things up, make things lighter. But now that I'm just making cakes for tutorials, I don't keep as much pre-colored fondant on hand, which means that I have to dye it myself. Now, you have a couple of options when it comes to dyeing fondant, but the number one option for me would be to use Fondust. What I love about it is that it doesn't change the texture of your fondant at all, and it has a really high level of saturation. But a lot of us might not have that on hand, so your other option is gel food coloring. Now, this will change the texture of your fondant, but there are ways to combat this issue. The secret is to knead in a little bit of shortening and let it rest in plastic wrap before using. And if it's still too sticky, just add a little bit of cornstarch. So this is what I was asked to recreate, and honestly, I really had no idea what I was looking at. And you're gonna get a lot of these things if you're running your own cake business. There's a couple different ways that you can approach this. The first way is that when you're first starting out, you're going to accept a lot of orders because sometimes it's quantity over quality. And I don't necessarily mean that that means your work isn't going to be as good. It just means that you need to accept orders that maybe aren't your favorite. And for me, this would definitely fall under the category of something that I would not normally make or choose to make myself. The other way to approach your business is to only accept orders that fall under the category of things that you want to make. Fill your Instagram feed with pictures of cakes that truly inspire you when you make them. Now, I don't sell my cakes to the public at all anymore. I either make things specifically for tutorials or I make things to gift to other people. And although this isn't my favorite style, it's all about mindset. So in the end, I was still really happy with it, and I hope my little cousin liked it. Happy birthday! Do you ever wonder how many desserts a baker's family actually consumes? Well, I've mentioned on this channel before how most of the desserts I make, I give away. But if I honestly did keep them around, I don't think most of the things that I would make would get consumed. Because largely what I do is I make decorative cakes or I make sugar cookies, and truthfully, those aren't 2 desserts that are at the top of my family's list. My daughter really does not like frosting of any kind. My husband really dislikes anything with almond extract, and my son really isn't much of an eater in general when it comes to sweets. I would say my family's top favorite things that I make are brownies, cream puffs, and chocolate cream pies. And of course, they love my classic chocolate chip cookies. But since my channel largely focuses on the decorative sides of desserts, I really don't end up making these things that often. So I would say they only have desserts that I've made about 1 to 2 times a month. I normally make my gingerbread structures from scratch now, but I bought this kit because a lot of my friends and family buy this one too. And they call me up asking how can they actually get their house to stand up quickly. Things are falling apart and they want this activity done in a timely manner. All you need to do is take that granulated sugar, melt it down. You don't need to add any water to it. You don't even need a thermometer for this because really all you're doing is you're bringing it to the hard crack stage. And I find once the sugar is dissolved, it's there. Those first few clips that I showed you were all in real time. So this does harden up within about 10 seconds or so. Either dip your gingerbread into the sugar mixture or glide a metal spoon or heat-safe spoon across your gingerbread wherever it needs to be adhered to. You can use the traditional method of royal icing. It's just that if you don't have the right icing consistency, it's either too dry or too wet or not whipped well enough, then it will fall apart. And if you're making really big structures, I find that I have the most success with this particular method. Full tutorial down in the comments. When I was a kid, I was really big on savoring the moment and savoring vacations. We were very busy children. We went to math tutoring, figure skating lessons, piano lessons, and it was pretty much 24/7 studying. So the holidays always represented that one time of the year where I could actually relax. And there was always that inevitable feeling of slight disappointment the day after Christmas, but I always loved that I could look forward to the fact that there was still a little mini vacation coming. We would always travel to the island to go see my grandparents because that's where they lived, and so I knew there were always more presents to open and a little bit more Christmas to celebrate. And usually when we came back from that little vacation, it meant that we had to snap back to reality and there was no more relaxing. So then I was very, very sad. And now the day after Christmas, I feel very differently. I'm ready to clean everything. My tree is already packed and put away. There is no remnants of Christmas around here. And I'm ready to start planning for the next big cookie holiday, Valentine's. How much money would I have made if I actually sold these treat boxes? Keep in mind, I didn't sell any of these. These were a total labor of love. These were a mix of shortbread and sugar cookies, and they would range from $4 to $6 Canadian each. So about $1 American. I'm totally kidding. It just feels that way when I travel to the States. And these partially iced gingerbreads would range in price from about $3 to $6 each. Those gingerbread men are actually quite big, so that's where that pricing comes from. And these macarons with chocolate ganache filling and Italian meringue buttercream would be $2.75 each. And my smaller version of the chocolate chip cookie and ginger molasses cookie would be $2 each. And all of these cupcakes would be $4.25 each. And all of the additional packaging would be $10 each per treat box. Each family received a dozen macarons, and the cookie boxes were stuffed quite full with many, many cookies. Altogether, $81.50 Canadian, which is approximately $60 US today. As a baker, I like to stick to my tried and true recipes, but I do want to find a vanilla cake recipe that has a little bit more of a tighter crumb and something that doesn't require buttermilk and something that is a little bit stronger because I make a lot of carved cakes and a lot of tiered cakes. Whenever I'm testing out a cake recipe, I need it to be able to do multiple things for me. Because I generally focus on the cake decorating portion, I like to find recipes that can do it all. I will put a link in the description box for the recipe. It is not my own recipe. It was just called the perfect vanilla cake, and I really wanted to test it out to see if it indeed was the perfect vanilla cake. I was surprised at how well this worked for donuts and cake pops, as well as how well it performed for tiered cakes. It was nice and solid, and I really did like that it felt very, very sturdy. And because this used butter instead of oil, it really did have a little bit of a deeper flavor profile to it. It was slightly more labor intensive, but well worth it. One of the biggest concerns among customers that aren't very well versed in purchasing a lot of custom cakes is they want to make sure that the cake is going to be big enough for their event, which is understandable. You want to make sure that if you're spending the money on this custom cake, that it's going to be big enough to serve your party. Well, this one time, and this literally has only ever happened to me once, this customer came in and she ordered a cake. And she said, "I'm not a very big person, so I don't want a really big cake." And from my understanding of that statement, I thought that she needed less servings. So after confirming the number of servings that she needed, I suggested she go with a 6-inch cake, which was the smallest size cake that I offered at that time. She kept wanting to reiterate that she needed the cake to be small, and I assured her that it would be 6 inches exactly. Well, on the day of pickup, she was not happy. She said that the design was absolutely perfect, but that this cake was way too tall and did not go with her small frame. She actually ordered a couple more times after that, and I always made sure to cut down her cake by 50% in height. There's an art that's a little bit different to making a giant sugar cookie as opposed to a small sugar cookie. You have to be very, very careful about where you place things, and any jerky movements can cause the royal icing to crack, or the cookie itself can also crack. Now, I like to use the dehydration technique for my cookies, which means that I place it into the oven at 175 degrees Fahrenheit, just so that the top layer solidifies, and then I pull it back out. But be careful if you're doing this, because with a large cookie, it's very, very easy to create cracks. When you have smaller cookies, there's less movement, but like I mentioned, lots of movement when you're moving around a giant cookie. So if you're going to be using the dehydration trick, then be sure to be very careful. Now, this original can actually has a lot of detail on it, but I decided to make it simpler because I was about to use my projector when my son accidentally broke it. So I no longer have a working projector. I ended up having to do the full thing just freehand, and I made it a little bit more simple. A few days ago, I posted my lemon meringue pie short, and a lot of you guys thought that the beginning shot where I show myself cutting the lemons and juicing them was going to be hyper-realistic cake. Now, I've actually really wanted to get more into making hyper-realistic cakes, but I just haven't gotten around to it. Although I have been able to do a lot more over the summer baking-wise, I always have this misconception that I'm going to do amazingly large projects, but it just never works out that way because there's so many birthdays in the summer and I'm actually making cakes for other people. Now, this isn't a hyper-realistic cake. I would say it's more on the side of erring towards realism instead of a cartoon. And the reason that this came to be is I wanted one last treat in the treat box that I was creating. And I did not feel like baking one more thing, and I knew I had a bunch of leftover cake pops. So I thought, what kind of foods go along with my treat box that I've already created that's going to be easy to put together? And I'm pretty happy with the end result, but it did give me a little bit of anxiety thinking about all the lunches that I'm going to have to start packing again for school. If you're a cake decorator or an artist, you've probably experienced this where you look back on your old work and you are really not happy with it, even though you loved it at the time. Well, I remember this one time, the very first time that I ever made a wedding cake. It took me forever, and I really wish I still had the photos of it because it was absolutely hideous. I put every ounce of effort into it, and I really did have a passion for baking, but honestly, the top tier was just so small and so short and was a little bit rounded, and it just did not look nice at all. There were elements of it that were pretty, but I feel really bad to this day thinking about how somebody has that cake in their photos from their wedding day. Looking back on my body of work, I really do think that there are some cakes that I'm less proud of or ways that I could have improved certain cakes, but I don't feel the same level of guilt because I feel like they're still pretty passable. If it's any consolation though, I remember charging them pennies. So this was the day of Brandcast, and YouTube gifted me with this really adorable apron. First, our day started out with Starbucks, of course. Then we sent off a postcard to a friend, and then massages so we could actually relax because let me tell you, I was so full of nervousness and really fun energy, but also energy that needed to be tamed. Now, everyone at YouTube Canada really allowed me to come up with my own setup and bring my vision to life. I had no idea really how big this setup was going to be, but they had all of that under control, and I just threw out some ideas, like everything in my kitchen is very monochromatic, and we have a lot of sprinkles. I've got my sprinkle wall, and you guys know all about my cookie cutter wall if you've seen my videos, so we really tried to incorporate that. So everything was just so well thought out, and everything had a reason. Right down to this cake here, I really wanted to make sure that I was sitting on top, and I also wanted to make sure that it was incorporating all of the things that I love. And here I am, ready to go and ready to get started. So my best friend and I love to decorate cakes, and she has this habit with her cake decorating that I never really noticed up until about 3 or 4 years ago. And I never pointed it out to her until I realized, oh my goodness, I have the same habit too. I learned a lot of techniques from online, but my foundational skills I would have to attribute to my friend's knowledge and teaching. Which is why when she would say things like, never put a fondant cake in the fridge, or I would never steam a cake because I don't like shiny cakes, I really took it at face value. But then I noticed sometimes months or even years later, I would see her doing something like putting a fondant cake in the fridge or steaming her cakes, even after she specifically told me never to do that. Now, she really was never ever doing this to steer me in the wrong direction. It is just simply an evolution of your cake decorating skills. For example, this method of making ganache never seemed to work for me in the past, but then I finally learned how to do it properly, and it is significantly easier to do it that way. So although I've mentioned in the past that that's not my preferred method, it always is an evolution in pastry arts. I love the idea of repurposing things, and to be honest, I would do it more often if I had the time. More often than not, I end up either donating it or sometimes I have to throw it away. Now, unfortunately, I can't donate a fake cake, so I really do try to reuse the styrofoam pieces as much as possible. Whenever I'm working on projects or content that I really enjoy, I often think about how I repurposed, quote unquote, my journey with baking. I think this happens a lot to people where they embark on some sort of career that they think they're really going to love, but when it comes down to it, they don't love all aspects of the job. Now, to be fair, you're not going to love every aspect of the career that you choose, but I do believe that for longevity's sake, you do need to be content in whatever it is that you're doing. And I got to a point with my baking business where I really wasn't that content anymore. I was overrun, overworked. And it turns out I really didn't like to have to answer to people when it came to my creative freedom. So rather than throwing away all the skills that I worked so hard on, which I know happens to a lot of us bakers, I just ended up repurposing. I'm a teacher, and I'm also somebody that really loves creating sweet treats and over-the-top desserts. So it's completely fair for the people around me to assume that I would want to be something like a home ec teacher. And I did toy with the idea, but I kind of pushed it aside because in the end, I decided that music teaching was the place for me to be. I love putting on musicals. And yes, my love of music is in the end what trumped my decision to become a home ec teacher. However, there is one little thing that was always in the back of my mind. I had the nicest home ec teacher. She was super sweet and she was also incredibly talented. Her cooking and sewing abilities were clearly evident. But for some reason, a vast majority of students were very rude to her. And to this day, I actually have no idea why, because she was so sweet and she taught such a fun class. But I feel like this subconsciously stuck with me. What kind of student were you in school? I was a really, really good student, but I'm not sure if that was so natural. My parents were very, very strict when it came to grades, and getting good grades was always very important. And I did do well in school, but sometimes this gave me a lot of anxiety as a child. Getting the highest grade in the class was always really important for my parents, so I definitely tried to strive for that. And for the most part, I did receive really high grades, and I usually was at the top of the class, but the issues really came up when I wasn't at the top of the class, and everyone would collectively gasp when they found out that I didn't get 100% on a test. I think those formative years, though, really pushed me into going into a creative field where there really is no best and no worst, because everybody feels differently about art. And although I competed a lot, whether it was in grades, figure skating, or piano, I've discovered over the years that I really just like doing my own thing. I get a lot of comments on my channel saying that they get a little bit nervous when they see that I no longer sell cakes or cookies from home. They wonder if this is a viable career or not. I've always had a full-time career outside of baking, but I've crunched the numbers just to see would I be able to make it as a home baker even if I didn't have my other job. Now, of course, everything that I say needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because a livable and comfortable wage for me might be completely different for you. But to give you some context, if you want to own a detached home in the province and in the city that I live in, then you need to make around $200,000 to $300,000 Canadian annually per household. And this is why I always worked 3 jobs all the way through my 20s. But then I thought, let's recalculate this and just think, if we don't want to own a home, but we just want to live comfortably. I think if I were able to dedicate every hour to my baking business, then I would have been able to make a pretty decent living, probably be able to go on vacations every now and again, and feed my family, which is the most important part. But one of the biggest downsides for me personally is that my work would always be at home, so I would work 24/7. If you're running a baking business, or you've worked at a bakery, or you just work in retail or customer service in general, then you may unfortunately be able to relate to this story. When my daughter was 1 year old, we found out that she was allergic to peanuts, and it was a super, super scary moment. So I kind of understood where this customer was coming from, but at the same time, I really didn't. They were really panicked because they forgot to purchase cupcakes prior to their event, and we felt bad for them, so we decided to stay behind just to make sure that they could get their cupcakes in time. And it wasn't like this was the only order that we had on the go. We had a lot of other tasks to do as well. So finally, we get everything done. They come and pick up the cupcakes. They're pretty grateful for it, but then we get a call that asks if we are a peanut-free facility, and we weren't, so we had to be honest. And then they come back and demand a refund for the cupcakes. They did end up getting a refund, and unfortunately there was really nothing we could do with those cupcakes since they had left the site. And although everyone kind of lost out in the situation, it was definitely a teachable moment I won't forget. I hear variations of this comment time and time again. Sometimes it's said really respectfully or in an uplifting manner, and other times it's said in a not so nice manner. But I can pretty much guarantee that the majority of the people that say these things are not content creators themselves. Because if you were, you probably wouldn't say it. Now, here's the thing. I'm not here to say everybody should dwell on the negative things that are being said to them. But sometimes I think that those negative comments actually do open up important or engaging discussions. Sometimes it can be misconstrued as complaining, but when it comes down to it, I know that it's just somebody behind a keyboard, and probably the majority of them wouldn't be able to say those things to my face, and maybe they're just having a bad day. So when I take a random quote that's been said to me, I'm not actually complaining or asking people to make me feel better. I'm really just using that quote as a segue to talk about a bigger issue. For example, I've really been enjoying that conversation that all of you have been having about what makes a professional cake decorator. So thank you to all of you that take the time to comment. This is what I brought to my Thanksgiving dinner this year. So I decided to go with classic cookies. I always find when I make cookies that are chewy on the inside and crisp on the outside, everybody loves them and they find it a lot easier to eat than things like cupcakes or cake or even pie, because who wants to sit there slicing pie? Yeah, that is usually my job. But this time I decided to go for just super yummy cookies. So the first ones you saw there were my brown chocolate chip cookies. They are some of my favorite cookies that I make. And then this next one is double chocolate. And I use this trick all the time. You guys have seen this before. I'm making different varieties of this double chocolate chip cookie. The first one there was Smarties. That one is a little bit of sea salt and some yummy marshmallows on top of that one, and mint chocolate Aero, because I am a huge mint chocolate fan, as is my mom. So I did make this thinking of her. Those are the cookies. They're ready to go. I also made madeleines. Happy Thanksgiving. It is the day before I leave for Toronto, and I am so incredibly nervous. Not for the actual Brandcast event itself. I'm just nervous about making it there, getting there on time, and my whole family has been sick. So that's how I'm feeling today. Woke up pretty early and then went on a flight for about 4 hours.
For a taxi.
Before going to Brandcast, I really had no idea what it was. I just knew that I was going to be making cakes and cookies and doing fun things like that, and I knew how to do that. So I was really excited when my friend Andrea said that she was coming with me regardless of what I said, and I could not have been more thrilled. She was my camera person. She was also there for just emotional support, and we have been best friends since we were 3 and 4 years old, so it was really cool to have her there experience this with me. This is me placing the display cake that Joey, the caking girl, and I made together, and look at this amazing setup. I know that was only a snapshot, but if you guys want to subscribe, you'll see more. I just got home from work, but I have been dying to open up this package. It was sent to me by the Cookie Countess, so let's open it up and see what's inside. Oh, this looks awesome. I love it when we've got brands that actually offer ways to organize your stuff. I've mentioned this in videos before that I've never really been that happy with my piping tip organization. It's better than those boxes that I used to have where everything used to fall over, but it still wasn't my first choice because I couldn't see every single tip. When we first got this house, I really wanted to make sure that the baking kitchen was going to be a space in which everything was going to remain organized. My style is that I like to have easy access to everything, and this type of storage allows me to add on if needed. Thank you so much to the Cookie Countess for sending me this. I love organizing my stuff, as you can see. And finally now I can actually see all of my piping tips. I might just need to pick up myself some more of these. I was never grounded as a child. I mean, to be honest, I was a really, really good kid. I rarely broke the rules. I think maybe once or twice in my lifetime, I had privileges like TV taken away. Whatever fun event that was coming up was always the new threat. If you don't do X, then you won't be able to go out with your friends, or you won't be able to go to your best friend's birthday party. But the worst and most scariest threat of all was when my mom would say we would not be able to go trick-or-treating. And I went to a private Christian school, so when I tried to tell my friends, oh my gosh, my mom's not gonna let me go trick-or-treating, they just didn't understand because many of them did not celebrate Halloween and did not go trick-or-treating at all anyway. It was never actually consuming the candy for me that was that exciting about Halloween. To be truthful, I do like Halloween candy, but I wasn't all that obsessed with it. Luckily, in all my years of trick-or-treating, my mom never actually grounded us from that. And she didn't even actually put any restrictions on the candy, but we did only choose to eat one a day. Are you known as the dessert person of your family? Ever since I started making cakes and cookies and all these other types of desserts, I've become known as that person in my family and kind of my friends. We also have cake decorators in our group of friends as well, so I don't always get delegated with that task. When I first opened up Sweet Dreams Bake Shop and it was an actual place where I sold baked goods, I definitely always wanted to be that person that brought in the dessert. It was a really big pride thing for me, and I think I did actually feel kind of sad if people didn't ask me for desserts and cakes back then. But a lot of my family and friends now don't even really bother asking me to bring anything specific at all. They just assume that I am going to be bringing some sort of dessert. And this could go from anything to a lavish party setup where, of course, I'm going to be making the desserts, or it could be something as simple as a barbecue. But I must say, if you do ask me to bring something like a veggie plate, chances are I'm going to bring you something like this. Which one is your favorite veggie cookie? I can't believe it's almost been another full year on YouTube. When I originally started this channel, I had no idea that it would turn into anything that I would do on a consistent basis for this long. This year, the channel gained 67 million minutes viewed, which is incredible to me because last year we definitely did not have those numbers. And incredibly, the channel also gained 176,000 subscribers, which is just mind-blowing. But I think that the best memory of 2022 was when I was invited by YouTube, where I got to represent the dessert side of YouTube, and it was incredible. I got to meet a lot of amazing people at that event. And shortly before that time, I also received my very first play button. And that play button was something that I was working towards ever since I started my channel back in 2020. But above all else, I get to end 2022 with a happy and healthy family and friends and wishing you all a successful 2023.